Dopamine itself is not the reward. It's the buildup to the reward. And the reward has more of a kind of opioid bliss-like property, which itself is not bad if it's endogenous, released from within. But when we can just sit there like the rat with no dopamine, gorging ourselves with pleasures, so to speak, what you end up with is somebody that feels really unmotivated, and those pleasures no longer work to tickle those feel-good circuits. And so there's no reason for them to go out and pursue anything.
The reward itself, whatever it is, might be rewarding the first time around, but then over time, the way that we're wired will make it less reinforcing, less rewarding. So then we need a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more. So ultimately, the reward itself is not the thing to seek because it's the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. It's ever elusive.
To pursue rewards, but understand that the pursuit is actually the reward if you want to have repeated wins, okay? Pleasure experienced without prior requirement for pursuit is terrible for us. It's terrible for us as individuals, it's terrible for us as groups, and we are finding now, and we are going to increasingly find, that those who will be successful, young or old, are going to be those people who can create their own internal buffers. They're going to be able to control their relationship to pleasures, because the proximity to pleasures and the availability is the problem. If you look at the increase in use of drugs of abuse or prescription medication, which at least at the first pass deliver pleasure, pain relief, the whole issue with the opioid crisis, and dopaminergic drugs like Ritalin, Adderall, there sometimes is a clinical need, but tons of people are taking those recreationally now or to study. Huge dopamine increases are what those cause. That is a problem. That's a serious problem because it creates a cycle where you need more of that specific thing. I always say addiction is a progressive narrowing of the things that bring you pleasure.
It's like a nature's cruel trick in the modern ecosystem because it, essentially turns us all into people with addiction because we have everything. So that constant pursuit, that never being, satisfied with what we have, with always wanting more, gets us into this trap of compulsive overconsumption or addiction.
We often think about the extremes of addiction, and those are really severe, but we also have to think about the more subtle forms of something we really love, but indulging in it just a little too often so that it no longer has that edge. There have been really good studies of people who jump out of airplanes with parachutes. I'm sure it's a lot of fun. It looks like a thrill, but people do it over and over and over again, often die doing other things. They often become drug addicts because it's a huge high. Oh yeah, a lot of that.
Interesting.
And there are a lot of examples of this. I mean, you can get addicted to anything. The key is to regulate that behavior. So you asked what should people do? Well, certainly I'm trying this now, and I have some good examples. Some young people I know and work with are taking breaks from not just social media, but no cell phone whatsoever. I'm actually trying an odd experiment, which is for the first hour of every day, no phone. Right, so we have circuitry in the brain related to the so-called basal ganglia, and we have goes, sort of activating, think gas pedal, and then there's a lot of no-go circuitry. And learning how to keep that no-go, don't circuitry, as we could call it, tuned up is very important. And so many times throughout the day, but I try and get 25 a day, where I actively refrain from doing something that I impulsively want to do. Could be looking at my phone, but it could even be something trivial. Like I want to walk to the kitchen and get a glass of water. So I'm actively engaging in denial, not cognitive denial, in action-based denial. So restricting my behavior in some way as a way of keeping these dopamine circuits tuned up. Also not looking at my phone first thing in the morning for an hour, because knowing what we now know about the second phase of sleep and REM sleep being more predominant, the second wave of sleep, and the fact that you're working through a lot of emotional and logistical contingencies, you're reshaping your brain in sleep. That's when neuroplasticity occurs, during sleep. It's triggered in wakefulness, but it actually takes place in sleep, especially that second half of sleep. When you wake up in the morning, you are in a perfect position to what I call receive the download of all the work that your neural circuitry has been doing the night before. But if you immediately go to a sensory experience, especially a rich sensory experience of stuff scrolling by, you're actually missing the information that you processed at night. And even more importantly, that second half of the night during REM sleep is when the emotional weight of things becomes let's say you put it on the shelf properly. Things that are important to emotionally register get put in one shelf. Things that were like the comment you got on Twitter that was triggering doesn't seem like such a big deal after a good night's sleep. And that's because that second half of sleep is actually when you re-experience these things, but your body can't secrete adrenaline. It's kind of an internal form of therapy or even trauma therapy. Yes. And that's why people who don't get that sleep are very, they're easily agitated. They feel like the world is crushing down on them. So when I wake up in the morning, I want to receive ideas that I want to learn from my learning. And if you take in new information, you are not in a position to do that.
Our dopamine, it's a signal, right? We do something, it feels good, our brain releases dopamine, it says, do that thing again. And then we go into a dopamine deficit state, and then that says, that's a very powerful physiologic drive that insists that we pursue that thing again, even when we stop liking it. So that's the vicious cycle. But your solution to this modern problem, and it's a modern problem that we all have, is to seek more, to try harder, to find the road with the most friction and go there.
Many people find it hard to subjectively attach dopamine to something they don't want to do. How do you get motivated? Well, one way to do that is if you are good at subjectively attaching dopamine to the pursuit, just knowing, okay, I really am hungry for this. I'm going to tell myself that, making it 1% of the way is a success, and I'm going to keep going and I'm going to keep ratcheting on. And that's great if you can do that. But for people that can't do that, understanding this relationship with the pleasure-pain balance can be more powerful. Just understanding the more friction and pain that you experience, the greater the dopamine reward you will get later, and that serves as its own amplifier of the whole process of pursuing more dopamine. You're balancing the dopamine and epinephrine systems. Epinephrine being this molecule of universal currency of energy output. It could be out of hate or it could be out of love. Epinephrine doesn't care, and actually dopamine doesn't care. None of these systems care about us. They just work underneath our conscious control. But when you start to understand that hitting the gas pedal is great, but hitting the gas pedal and then coming off the gas pedal a little bit, you can kind of sit in a more relaxed RPM, actually allows you to go much further. You're balancing the dopamine and epinephrine systems.